Welcome. This is a video showing the highlights of a trip that Jan and I took in March of 2016. We visited Italy, Croatia, Greece, and Turkey. Much of the trip was on a Viking cruise ship, and the rest was on our own. So here we go. This map shows our basic itinerary for the trip. We flew into Venice. We spent 2 days on our own there, and then boarded our Viking cruise ship, I think the Viking Star. We then went to Pula in Croatia, Dubrovnik also in Croatia, Kotor, that's in Montenegro. Then went to the Greek island of Santorini, followed by Athens, and then to Ephesus. Due to the bombing in Istanbul, the cruise ship changed its itinerary, and we actually stopped in Troy for a day on the way to Istanbul, and then just arrived in the morning and left the ship. We then spent 2 days on our own in Istanbul. We had 2 days on our own in Venice, and we started the first day with a guide and went to St. Mark's Square that you see here and St. Mark's Basilica. One of the interesting things we learned here, and was a theme actually repeated in many of the sites we saw on our trip, is how much gets stolen from other cities in terms of statues and columns, that sort of thing. So at St. Mark's, on the front, there are 4 horsemen at the top above the entryway. Those are bronze, and they were from Constantinople. They were created in the 2nd or 3rd century AD, and they were stolen by the Venetians during the Fourth Crusade and brought to Venice. And then Napoleon in the 1800s stole them from Venice, took them to Paris, put them on the Arc de Triomphe, and then after Waterloo, they were returned to Venice. There are also 4 smaller statues that you see that are in a red stone, and those also came from Constantinople and were taken, and I think they are, again, about 3rd or 4th century AD. We visited the Ducal Palace, which was a very impressive building, and especially the main room where they held large assemblies. Considering the time it was built, it was very, very large and quite impressive. We also saw there a stone carving of a face with a mouth, and that was a place for citizens of Venice to anonymously drop off tips about their neighbors who may not have been paying their taxes or had committed some sort of crime. Canals, of course, are the main attraction in Venice, and they range from the Grand Canal, which is pretty wide, to lots of just very narrow canals where there's only room for a couple gondolas to pass. There are no cars in Venice, so you either go by water or you walk. And one of the most fun things to do in Venice is just go out and get lost and wander around and see what you find. And Jan and I did a lot of that. Pula, Croatia for a day. Pula is a real city as opposed to a tourist city like Dubrovnik or even Venice. The main attraction in Pula is the Roman amphitheater. It's one of the 6 largest amphitheaters in existence. It's very well preserved. The amphitheater could seat 23,000 spectators, which is kind of amazing when you think it was built 2,000 years ago. Could be covered to protect people from the sun and rain. It was used for the normal Roman events, gladiators and the like. The Knights of Malta used it for medieval fairs during their time period. And most recently, performers like Pavarotti, Leonard Cohen, Elton John, and others have performed there. They've even had recently hockey games performed. The next place we stopped is Dubrovnik in Croatia. This is a beautiful walled city on the Adriatic. It's one of the 10 best walled cities in the world, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The city was shelled very badly during the Balkan Wars in 1991. Serbia and Montenegro both shelled it and destroyed many of the buildings. You'll see on the map, all the dark dots on the map of the city are places where shells fell. And if you look at the pictures of the roofs of Dubrovnik, every red roof is a new roof. The darker brown roofs are the old roofs. And you can easily see that most of the city a lot of it has been rebuilt. It's just a picture-perfect city. It's used quite frequently for movie sets. A couple days before we arrived, they'd been filming a Star Wars scene there. Some of the parts of the set were still there. And of course, Dubrovnik is used as the set for King's Landing for the HBO series, the Game of Thrones. So Jen and I had a wonderful time there. We walked entirely around the city on the wall. I had been to Dubrovnik in 1965 as a child, but had gotten food poisoning the day before and was too sick to see the city. So I was glad to finally get inside and be able to wander around. Jan and I spent a day in Athens. We hired a guide and a driver to take us around. As you will see in the pictures, Athens is a large city. I think there are roughly 3.5 million people in the greater Athens. The traffic was terrible, primarily because of a strike that day. There are so many strikes and protests in Athens that our driver showed us an app he had on his phone, which showed day by day the planned strikes and the protests and what traffic patterns were going to be affected. And so you can see why things are not working so well in Greece these days. We went to the Acropolis and, of course, saw the Parthenon. It was under reconstruction, which we were told has been going on for a couple of decades, so it's rather slow. We also went to the Parthenon Museum, which is fairly new and is excellent and really worth the time there. Lots of wonderful Greek sculptures. On the upper floor, they've reconstructed the frieze of the Parthenon with the sculptures that they have, and then blanks for the sculptures that were stolen by Lord Elgin in, I think, the early 1800s and are now in the British Museum. So they certainly make a point that they would like their marbles back from the British Museum. We also stopped and saw the Theater of Dionysus, which is from the 4th century BC. A lot of Greek plays were put on there originally, and it's been recently reconstructed, so that was in good shape, and it seats, I think, about 17,000 people. And we also stopped briefly at the Olympic Stadium. This was built in, I think, 1896 for the first modern Olympic Games, but it was on the site where Olympic Games had been held in antiquity. Ephesus, which is located in Turkey, was really a fascinating place to visit. I'd heard of Ephesus before the trip, but really didn't know much about it. And it turns out Ephesus was one of the largest cities during the Greek and Roman times. It may have had a population between 150 and 250,000. And this was at a time when London had maybe 30,000 people. So it was well positioned as a port. It was part of the Silk Road and at the end of a road called the Royal Road built by the Persians. So it was a center for trade from the east and from Asia Minor going through to Greece, Italy, and Europe. Ephesus is famous for its temple to the goddess Artemis. I hadn't heard of this temple before, but it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Unfortunately, it was destroyed long ago. It was 4 times larger than the Parthenon in Athens, so a very impressive structure. Visiting Ephesus really gives you a feeling for what it'd be like to walk through a major Roman city. So it had, paved streets. There were public toilets and public baths. There was a theater that sat 25,000 people. There were a library, a brothel, complete with directions to the brothel carved into the sidewalk. They had sewage systems and street lighting. They recently excavated in Ephesus a housing section. And this was very interesting to walk through because you could see the rooms and the houses and how things were arranged, many of them with beautiful mosaics and a good view of the city. It was fun to walk through the streets and imagine the many historical figures that had walked these same streets. Alexander the Great stopped here as he was conquering the world. Mark Antony and Cleopatra lived here for a short time before the great battle of Actium, where they were defeated by Caesar Augustus. The Apostle Paul lived here for quite a while, as did the Virgin Mary, and Julius Caesar and the emperors Trajan and Hadrian all visited Ephesus. The whole experience for me helped me appreciate how advanced and sophisticated the ancient world was. We spent a morning visiting Troy. This was an unscheduled stop because our cruise ship decided that it was unsafe to have excursions in Istanbul, so they cut those short and put in Troy instead. It's not a lot to see in Troy, mainly stone walls. It's a pretty sight, though, looking out over the plain. We had a great guide there who had written a book on Troy, and he was very good at trying to bring Troy to life for us at one point, pointing out over the plain and asking us to imagine brave Hector out in mortal combat with Achilles on the plain, and then imagining Achilles dragging Hector's body around the walls of Troy. We then, after Troy, went and spent a little bit of time in a city called Çanakkale, where we had some great baklava and got our picture taken in front of a statue of Ataturk. For our 2 days in Istanbul, we were on our own, so we dropped off by the cruise ship very early in the morning. We hired a guide for the 2 days to take us around. And the first day we started with the 3 major sites in Istanbul that nearly everybody sees. And these are the Blue Mosque, the Hagia Sophia, and the Topkapi Palace. You can see them in the picture here. The Sultan Ahmed Mosque, more commonly known as the Blue Mosque because of the blue tiles on the interior walls, was built in the early 1600s. The design is a culmination of 2 centuries of Ottoman mosque development. It incorporates some Byzantine Christian elements from the neighboring Hagia Sophia, which was built over 1,000 years earlier, with traditional Islamic architecture. It is considered to be the last great mosque of the classical period, and it was extremely beautiful on the inside. Next, we visited the Hagia Sophia. The name comes from the Greek for holy wisdom. This church was constructed by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 537 and remained a Greek Orthodox basilica until the early or mid 1400s when it was converted to a mosque by the Ottomans. It remained a mosque until 1935 when it was turned into a museum. It's most famous for its massive dome. It's considered the epitome of Byzantine architecture, and it was the world's largest cathedral for over 1,000 years. It's quite an impressive architectural and engineering achievement. It was wonderful to walk through it. In addition to its size, there are many beautiful mosaics. I've shown a few here in the pictures. We also saw the famous Hagia Sophia cat. Apparently, this cat is one of the most photographed cats in the world. You can even find a picture of President Obama petting it. We visited the Topkapi Palace, which was the residence for the Ottoman sultans for about 400 years, from the mid-1400s to the mid-1800s. It was also where state business was conducted and royal entertainment. It's now a museum. At its peak, there were as many as 4,000 people living there. It has many interesting buildings and courtyards, but also the display of a lot of interesting artifacts, pottery, as well as several important holy relics from the Muslim world, which included Muhammad's cloak and sword and hairs from his beard. It was interesting to see those. And of course, there was the famous jewel-encrusted dagger featured in the movie Topkapi with Melina Mercouri and Peter Ustinov. We were glad we came in March before the start of the tourist season. We were able to get into every room and look at everything we wanted without a wait. Our guide told us that during the summer, many of the rooms have long waits, and many people just skip them because of the time involved. You can't talk about Istanbul without mentioning the ceramic tiles that are found on many of the historic buildings. They are beautiful, and we wanted to bring home more reproductions than we could possibly carry. Some of the tiles that we saw are shown here. These tiles tend to combine traditional Ottoman patterns with Chinese elements. Istanbul was on the key trade route with the East, and that had some significant influence. Iznik tiles are the most famous and come from a particular town in Turkey. The Blue Mosque has over 20,000 tiles from Iznik. We are just about done here. A few more pictures to go. The video you are seeing is of the Bosporus. The Bosporus is a narrow strait which connects the Black Sea with the Sea of Marmara and, via the Dardanelles, the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. It's a very heavily traveled shipping lane. We took a public ferry ride along the Bosporus to see a couple other palaces and lots of nice homes. Next, you are seeing what's called the Golden Horn. This is the inlet which forms the port to Istanbul. It starts with the peninsula where the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque are located and then curves around. A few last sites we saw. One was Basilica Cistern, which is a large underground cistern that was lost for many, many years and provided water to Istanbul. It is constructed with many stone columns that were taken from places all over the Mediterranean. We visited the spice market and picked up some spices and tea. We also went to the Grand Bazaar, which was large, very interesting to walk around. It does cater primarily to tourists. Our guide took us to a cafe which served a traditional and very unusual dessert that was favored by the sultans. This dessert is made from chicken breasts, and once you got over the idea of what you were eating, it tasted very good. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed seeing a bit of our trip.